to be using TimeCrypt, but I can't multitask, so I'm not going to be posting anything in chat. If any of my wings are better at this, then they can post timestamps. Otherwise, please time yourselves. Make sure you don't go over 7:15, in which case I'm going to have to do some waving at you, so you have to stop speaking because we will not be no longer writing notes. Please take POIs and offer POIs so that we have engagement. Unless there are any questions, then without any further ado, I would like to welcome the Prime Minister.
Hello, give me a second. I'm just going to set up my recorder as well as, give me a second. I'm pretty sure I'm audible. So I'm just going to set up my timer. PIs will be to chat at around the 5th minute. Yeah, that's about it. Please do not raise one through voice because I'm just easily distracted. I will take one later, do not worry. Preferably from CO. If not for time. Okay. Speech is going to begin in 3, 2, 1. Two things in the speech. First, setup. Second, my arguments with integrated weighing. First, definitions. An anti-establishment discourse movements are usually those that fight for the opposition of current norms in society, i.e. the ideologies we have, the social norms we had, but most importantly, the social units that we have, like the government or the medical institutions that we have, like usually that are offered publicly, etc. Often they are narratives that are radical and seek for the dissolution of like certain governments and such social institutions because their goal is anti-establishment at the very end, which means that their like end goal is to be able to destroy or take down these institutions because they see them as inherently problematic or inherently illegitimate to exist. What does the opposing look like under our side? First, we don't want the rise to exist. The rise specifically is the problem as it embodies the most radical form of the movement and therefore the most dangerous form. Secondly, we are okay with some form of this discussion to exist because we think it is also important to be able to acknowledge that there are people that politically side with this, that this political spectrum does exist so that we have epistemic access to the kind of narratives that spread from this, but because it is generally just important for freedom of speech. So democratically speaking, we're still upholding that principle. On to the arguments then. First, I think that the opposing the rise is important because it consumes their members into the narrative of an excessive kind of radical belief, and therefore we're unable to maintain good discourse. The problem with the rise leads to discussions such as how the structure of governments or social units is inherently bad and is inherently unchangeable because the dominant narrative and focus on the failures of the government, the horrible actions of the government, and why the current social structures are illegitimate. Thus, it adds fuel to the flame of anti-establishment sentiments, being the more legitimate and reasonable method of resolving societal issues in comparison to things like other forms of solvency that often come from other groups or narratives, i.e. liberal like narratives or Republican narratives or whatever. The rise also leads to the movement becoming more radical over time because it perpetuates dissolution sentiments as a necessary means because the nature of anti-establishment is usually fueled with the need to take on radical action in order to take down social units as like governments because they high really large entities that you need lots of resources and power to do so, and thus the trajectory is also likely to be very negative and highly pessimistic. But the second is that it often leads to things like the disregard for the need of social establishments and organizations, things like states or governments or your corporate entities or your medical institutions. And it disregards the fundamental reasons why certain social units exist to begin with, i.e. the state is here to provide us with educational and medical institutions. Sure, they may principally be pushing out ideologies that you may not be acquitted to, but that doesn't explain why other people, for example, are also believing in this ideology or not. It doesn't like disregard the capacity for the state to acknowledge your freedom to religion or your freedom of speech, etc. Or, for example, they're able to provide us things like labor opportunities. They're able to provide us protection from harm like through things like the security or military, etc. And thus they're able to provide us with like our daily needs to sustain our lives moving forward. I think the anti-establishment discourse narrative kind of like disregards that in favor of just the need to dissolve the state moving forward or to dissolve social entities. But third, it therefore impedes constructive criticism and discussions because discussions are majorly going to be fueled with this form of anger and resentment. Note that this grows through the rise, and thus hatred against certain ideologies exists, and thus the likelihood for productive and evolving advice to be given online or in spaces of discussion is likely going to be much more minimized insofar as the anti-dissolution sentiment is able to wash away certain narratives in favor favor of your narrative insofar as it is seen as the most legitimate and is seen as the most reasonable because of the rise. For those reasons, it means that the rise is more harmful in comparison to not having a rise at all. But the second is, who are the people that are going to lead discussions, and why is it likely bad? Three mechanisms. One, it is probably going to be very emotive and very charismatic individuals that are anti-establishment. These are the ones that are like high echelon celebrities that have large capital or like large reputation, or politicians that have large like political power or voting power, etc. Because they have the capacity to do it, because they have the capital, but also because they are also the ones that are able to deliver these radical messages well, due to like their influence and due to their reputation being the main platform for the messaging. So it means that these messaging is highly going to be digested and palatable for the everyday person, but also because a lot of people are easily compelled through authoritative messages that tell you like change is necessary and therefore we need to destroy the state because yada yada yada. But second, these are also often individuals that are outside the establishment. They have little to no experience probably in politics because they are outside of it, which means that their views are probably vastly unnuanced or generalized. And these are like everyday Karens that are going to coalesce and then try to build like from the like foundations against certain things like you see in the status quo right now, the banning of things like the How to Kill a Mockingbird, etc., in order to generate more votes for this movement. But this is important because these add to why the rise is likely to be led harmfully by its leaders, by its advocates, and therefore subsequently it adds to the fuel which we do not want to perpetuate on the first argument in OG. Before I go to the third argument, I'll take CO.
Yes, sometimes it's going to be a radical action, but in undemocratic states, radical action is exactly what you need to wake up the masses who've been sleeping for far too long. Why is that problematic for you?
If you need radical action, like shooting like medical civilians, or for example, trigger warning, the shooting yesterday that killed the mayor here near Ateneo, and you think it solves problems, I'm going to tell you that doesn't solve the reason why people are hungry. It doesn't improve economic policies, and I'm fucking sure that it does not solve the problem that you're trying to state, which is minor at best. But third, it leads to a more polarized form of discourse. The three mechanisms here is that one, this often also leads to things like antagonistic behavior, i.e. an enemy behavior, like opposition shitting on Duterte or AOC shitting on Republicans. This creates the polarization of views and actions in regards with the discourse because you're unlikely going to coalesce your ideas and the narratives with other political spectrums because you think that they are the enemy, because you think that just because they are aligned with some form of a state, it means that their narratives and their ideas are illegitimate to yours, and therefore you're unlikely to consider them in the vast majority of instances, but also because the rise legitimizes your ability to demonize other narratives and other political spectrums. But second, often these anti-establishment discourses are going to be highly uncompromising in nature because the solvency for them is the dissolution of establishment, because alternatives like what CEO says, like improving the current systems, are not a reasonable option to them. Thus, they are difficult actors to discuss openly with, but also because the rise adds onto this narrative by reinforcing the need for dissolution of institutions as a means of solving current issues without diving deeper into other possible means of doing so. But note, compromise is extremely important in discussions because there are some things we can compromise and there are some things we cannot, like shooting others because we see it as a form of dissolution of the state. Compromise helps us generate more holistic ways of improving society. Often, radical solutions as well, like in CO, are very narrow in their capacity to resolve issues. They're often very minute or minor in terms of scale, i.e., if we dissolve the government tomorrow, sure, we might get less political cronies in power, but you also lose things like social institutions, like medical institutions, that you depend highly on if you do it, which is a larger trade-off for the vast majority of people. And thus, in terms of the scale of harm that we do at the end, these discussions just do not bode well for how we can make sustainable change, but also how we can make people's lives better. For all of those reasons, propose. Thanks.
I thank the Prime Minister for a fine speech. I would like to welcome the League of the Opposition.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. There's a bit of a background noise. I'm not sure if it's going to go away.
Okay, just give me a second. I don't know, but what happens is that maybe I would have to join with my phone to get a much clearer audio. So just give me about 15 seconds. Let me join my phone. Is this clear?
Yeah, that is clear.
Awesome.
So whenever you're ready.
Okay, just give me a second. I'm going to take POIs in the chat, most likely around 5 minutes from closing Gov. Yeah, I'll be timing myself as well. Let me just close this so I know. Yeah, great. So I'll be paying attention to the chat and I'm going to take POIs there. All right. A, while there is more political, social, and economic progress and an entrenched accountability on our side, but B, descriptive analysis on what people resort to when this discourse is not on the rise in a way that ensures that all the harms that these guys talk about on GAB, which is the violence and the terrorism, eventually erupts in its entirety, right? Now, this dissatisfaction, like OG says, obviously happens when there is no utility for people, there is no accountability, people are discontent and disconnected from, they feel that politicians are discontent and disconnected from the social reality. Broadly, most of these movements target two things as we've seen in recent time: social and economic inequality, which is on the rise, but two, climate change and climate consensus. What I'm going to prove is that we need change and not necessarily to dissolve the state. So the way in which people frame anti-establishment agenda is not to dissolve the state like OG talks about. It's really to achieve change, and I'm going to explain this. First argumentation then. Why there is more political, social, and social progress, economic progress, and accountability. There is a reason why without this rise, most people, A, are less critical of the state, and people who are critical of the state tend to use much more violent instances. Because one, people usually have confirmation biases. B, most of the time, establishment rides on past achievement to justify their current existence and to create a false hope that people should keep on trusting in them. Three, these guys usually hold media structures, try to shape perception and manipulate choices. Four, they come out to blame this on other things rather than their actions. What the rise in this discourse does is to force them and to force a trend that breaks over this monopoly in a way that inserts exactly what is going on for people to see. What this means is that on their side, in the best case scenario, people are less critical of the establishment, which means people tend to feel like discourse is nothing because it is low and it is not intense, right? This rise on our side looks like opposition parties, movements, proliferating platforms for discussions to be had, setting tones and agendas for discussion that actively critique the establishment, carry people's sentiments from the ground and craft them into policies, into movement goals in a way that represents the very sentiments that people are expressing. You see this in the green parties across Europe, where these parties are taking the anti-establishment sentiments that are being expressed and formulating them into parties to tap into this energy, into policies to tap into this energy to be able to ride on this. What this means is that what this rise is doing is giving tangible actors that can create change the ability to tap into the dissatisfaction of the people on the ground to be able to offset the political system. What this means is gradually what we've seen in Europe, where most of these parties ride on this, gain more popularity, and get political leverage to force establishments to make valuable political concessions on things like environment, on things like poverty gap and inequality gap. So, for instance, given that they have parliamentary systems, etc., in most of these states, the Green parties is able to force them because you need their vote or you need their support to be able to maintain, for instance, a majority to be able to form a government, which means that they're able to make concessions. On their side, most of these progressive parties are unable to ride on this discourse, right? Secondly, what it means is that accountability is intensified in two ways. A, because these progressive parties are now able to break into the dominant political sphere to be able to create check and balances that disrupt antagonistic lobbying on their side. So even if you're an established party and lobbyists are continuously lobbying you, because you still need most of these progressive parties who are anti-establishment and have goals that are competing with yours, you are most likely going to make strategic concessions that make sure that most of the extremely disruptive policies are not passed. Secondly, there's heightened skepticism
now push for demand for things like more decentralization of power, because nobody trusts the establishment. So you want to be more checks and balances. That means that inherently in the way in which most of these states progress, there's gradual decentralization. There's gradual checks and balances. For instance, they reshape their constitution in a way that makes sure that the president has certain limitations and certain checks on the way in which they can do things. What this means is that inherently you morph states to become much more accountable and much more decentralized on our side. Before I move on, closing Gav. CG.
Yes. I apologize. Green parties are on the rise due to the fact that climate education has reached a very high peak, and also the climate change issues are more visible to people. They would be on the rise regardless of this discourse.
No, you can't tell me that they will be on the rise regardless of this discourse and just get away with it. I'm showing you that they are amplifying this dissatisfaction to be able to make people trust them, that they are the ones who can deliver the things that they are dissatisfied about. And so you cannot simply say, and most of the things that you are talking about, these teachings are directed towards conditioning people to be skeptical of the establishment. And that in itself is a mechanism that we quote. I'm not sure why this is exclusive to you. Secondly, why do people resort to all the violence and antagonism that OG talks about? Because note this, anti-state establishment feelings and sentiments exist regardless, because the conditions for which people feel this way still exist. What it means is that people need a mechanism by which they express these feelings and the feelings that they have and the satisfaction that they have. The rise of discourse on our side provides an accepted platform through which these people express these feelings. What it means is that given that policies are crafted to reflect these feelings, there is intense conversations which breed validity, and these conversations are much more constructive, rational, working through legitimate means and less destructive. People feel that these conversations and these platforms and these parties are trustworthy to be able to carry out their dissatisfaction. On their side, people see discourse as an unsuccessful means because it is not intense, it is not on the rise, and it's not being ridden upon. Hence, they opt for more radical option. Why? Because voting won't work, because most of these states are illiberal to begin with. What it means is that what you see like cases in Nigeria, where Boko Haram feels no amount of discourse would solve their problem because nobody is talking about it, and there is no rise, no critique to the state. They resort to terrorism, they resort to killings, destruction, etc., and that harms more people. On our side, these things are reduced due to two reasons. A, because there's the reduced need to resort to these options because you see a legitimate political institution that is being constructed for you to express these negative sentiments through them in a much more curtailed and legitimate way. B, you are viewed as illegitimate if you have legitimate platforms on our side and you move to those terrorism actions, and that means that you reduce the frequency, you reduce their scale of lobbying to amass more support. There is a structural limitation to the extent to which people can express their anger. You force them to the extreme on their side. We are proud to oppose.
I think the hello for a fine speech. I would like to welcome the DPM.
Hello, assuming I'm audible, POIs through chat and through chat only. Please don't open your mics at any point in time unless I say so, because I easily get distracted. Just setting up my timer. Starting in 3, 2, wait. Anti-establishment discourse, parties and politicians who identify as such emerge in recent years all around the globe in response to political class that are irrational and powerful. They aim to redefine the political agenda and act as an agent of change against the systemic de-alignment by employing an us versus them discourse opposed to the entire class of individuals wielding power. It is a discourse of no compromise and has a chilling effect in the development of change. I just want to note that there is no case coming from opening opposition as to why this us versus them narrative is something that will not happen in their side of the house. This is very important because at that point, it is more likely that we are going to create echo chambers where individuals are not engaging with each other within the discourse because they think that others are irrational. They are not going to listen to us because they think that the establishment is too good because it is able to benefit them, which means they are unable to change their views because the establishment is too rewarding for them, right? So, on that, I feel like they already lose the debate. But moreover, how do we construct an anti-establishment identity and discourse? All rebuttals integrated. So, an anti-establishment identity is constructed when a political class to point out the cleavage of the conflict between the governing body and the people, right? They then use this to evoke an opposition to this class to garner support from the citizens. The difference between this is that populism is that it does not point out a threatening minority. But second, it suggests that the establishment is composed of an expressive irrationality of the political class. But third, that the anti-establishment actors deploy aggressive and uncompromising styles of politics, and their views as well should not be compromised, like AOC, like Duterte, for example. This is because any remnants of being a part of the establishment decreases their moral high ground, and it suggests that the establishment is good to an extent. So they should not compromise because their principles are going to be inconsistent, right? So this entails a few things. One, the discussion is very polarized because we cannot compromise on other actors. We cannot talk with them because they are irrational. This is the point where we create echo chambers because we do not recognize that there might be reasons that other individuals hold their views. But second, because we think that these political elite, to an extent, some of them are not the reasons as to why this establishment is not working, but we think all of them are complicit just because they are benefiting from it, meant that we are less likely going to enforce development of discussion in order to put them in and push them towards our side of the house, which means that we are less likely going to talk to them at the end of the day, right? But this is the point where we create echo chambers because we do not recognize that there might be reasons that other individuals hold their views. But secondly, that others who are within the establishment should not be engaged with because they are complicit to these very views, and we should not compromise on certain issues. This means that we are also unable to tap on possible resources from the elite and the political class that might help us or might believe in us, necessarily because we think that they are complicit in their views and we should not compromise and not engage with them. Other mechanisms. It leads to actors becoming targets of the political establishment that seeks to ignore and destroy them to protect the current establishment. The view is that the elite has incentives to conspire against individuals who are anti-establishment because they want to protect and secure their power within that establishment, which means it is necessary for them to quell any anti-establishment views and discourses, necessarily because it is able to protect their power. But fifth, it contends that anti-establishment parties are novel for smallness, denoting innocence, and outsiders for the anti-identity cannot be constructed within the establishment. Since many individuals are moving and interacting within the establishment, it is less likely that the people who are influenced or the people who will become members are more likely individuals that are not going to be within the establishment, right? So smaller numbers. What are the impacts of this? The discussion is a small amount of people participating in it. But second, even though there are a lot of people who are going to engage in it, individuals who participate in it are also driven by the ensuing discourse to disengage from the discussion because they might be harmed, because the political class might go against them and conspire against them and do a lot of tactics in order to make sure that these views are not going to be present. So there is a chilling effect within the discussion where we continually discuss, but you are too ivory tower to see that it does not drive change. But we are also forcing individuals to not engage within this, which means we get less support, we get less money, for example. So I am unsure as to why it is accountable when it does not gain enough numbers to create a voice and be noticed by the society. This is an important issue because it means that the case of opening opposition about being able to create solace minimizes when you cannot create a community because there are lesser numbers and there are lesser people that are going to participate in this discourse. Before going on, OO.
Yeah, great. What I'm not sure about is, given all your characterization about how people feel about the state, how are they going to express this given that most democratic institutions are inaccessible and inefficient on your side?
Yeah, but it is unclear as to why this is the view that they see, in as much as they still believe that the establishment can be reformed, and as much as they still benefit from the establishment to an extent, means that their fear, and also because the fear of having no alternative. For example, the anti-establishment views of throwing away the police or breaking away the police and not having any alternative of what is going to protect the people. So many people are unsure as to why, if we remove the state, if we remove the police, what are going to be the replacement of it? Means that they just need to reform and to make sure that they are able to engage in the benefits of the current establishment. So going on, what are the possible paths of discourse? This addresses CEO's extension about how radicalism is good. Anti-establishment discourse has a large possibility of transitioning to a more anti-democratic stance if they do not delineate themselves clearly away from the political establishment and the anti-democratic forces. This entails that if you are anti-establishment, you are unable to create traction in numbers. One, because individuals see that this is idealistic because there are no proper alternatives to the establishment, the answer to the POI. But second, this is too extreme that individuals do not just enter into this because it is too unpalatable to their conservative views, especially in developing nations where we see that the state is very important, that the family is very important, for example, that marriage is also very important, but also because individuals see that the establishment is good to an extent, which means that it just needs tinkering, but not necessarily uproot and eradicate it means that you get less numbers, right? But second, if they fail to maintain their stance in opposing the political elite, the party develops to normalization, radicalization, disappearance, institutionalization, or gaining power, right? If they do win, there are the possible path of anti-establishment actors that my experience might be subsumed by the political establishment and they are going to assume a more establishment post or try a more establishment post. For example, AOC's discourse is very limited right now. She does not actively go against Biden anymore because she sees it against her, but also because in order to enter the establishment and in order to reform the establishment, they need to be less anti-establishment, which means the discourse are not for the long term, which means all the benefits of opening opposition about, solace and stuff are short term, in as much as it is not sustainable. It is more likely that it's going to be subsumed by the establishment at the point that we recognize that the establishment is necessary at the end of the day. So with all of those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
I think the DPM for fine speech. I would like to welcome the DLO.
Hello, everyone. You can see me.
Yes, seems all good.
Sure, I'll take POI in the 5th minute, most likely from CO. I'd like to see it, and kindly ask in the chat. I'll be observing it. However, like in the 5th minute, if I pass the 5th minute and I've still not taken in, you can just softly put on your camera, wave your hand, or just ask softly. It's very important. All right. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. There are two things which we analyze in opening opposition, which wins us the debate. One, where we are able to better achieve solvency in status quo through accountability and competition to the establishment. And two, how we are able to curb the most radical sects of the anti-establishment movement. And I think these are the two things which we win on. The very first thing you need to understand within this debate is how do anti-establishment groups look like in opening government world? Because they themselves do concede that they would exist. The lack of a rise in discourse then means that they are most likely going to exist within echo chambers, are less likely to be engaged within the wider political spectrum. But then two, they are going to have little or less capacity, which means that their incentives, or because of the burdening incentives to continue to act, to continue to have that margin of influence, means that they are far more likely to partake in more radical actions or violent actions, which will change the state. Three, on the comparative then, because they are not engaged, they are far more likely to be stuck within echo chambers and all of the impacts or the harms which these guys talk about. How does discourse matter? Or maybe unless discourse means something else in Ghana. The way discourse happens is you have experts, different individuals being able to pitch in on this very narrative and talk about it. You have it being done in universities where people decide to drink and smoke and talk about these things, where they can exist as discourse on platforms, on the media, etc. They can also mobilize to form movements, thereby being able to take far more actions. For example, feeding people on the streets, deciding to spread the campaign message amongst a number of things. The rise then indicates that these can also evolve to become political parties which seek to establish themselves against the establishment, right? And this can happen because the way in which opening governments wants you to understand anti-establishment sentiments is, we don't want the states to exist. We don't think anarchy is the plausible comparative of anti-establishment movement in all instances. We think it can exist in so many forms. They don't engage the spectrum. The second thing that they try to talk to you about is, well, if you do not have this buy-in, people do not support and you do not get the massive consequences of their action. But where this narrative works is where people have completely lost hope in the establishment. I'm unsure why people continue to receive those small handouts and still think this is important. We think that people's likely reactions will be in three ways. One, they're either going to have resentment anyway against the establishment. Two, they most likely have political apathy because they've lost hope and therefore are not engaging in things like elections, etc. We think in the extreme cases, people are likely to be independently violent, even independent of being part of this anti-establishment movement. The reasons why this is important is because then it is unlikely to reach the mechanism of reform and then hope, which opening government wants to talk about. They provide to you these specific things and aim for a huge impact of saying there'll be change in our system with no analysis or mechanisms, which maybe they expect to be filled by white privilege. On radicality, we say because these things still exist in small frames and they are likely to be quelled by the government, these individuals will still find a way to engage in violence. This violence does not require many people involved in it because we already showed you that people are more averse to violence, which means that these violence continue to have an impact, which means on the comparative, where we showed you that this violence is likely to be toned off, we are more likely to win. I'm unsure why the buy-in then leads to everybody engaging in violence in their side. Our side also then provides more structures, which creates more incentives for you to be able to partake within the larger movement, which means that for you to get buy-in, you are less likely to encourage people to take on violence because you want them to be able to support your movement. You want to be able to gain legitimacy, pass vetting from the Electoral Commission, amongst a number of things. This also means that there's more likely to be infusion of diverse platforms, different opinions, which means that even if bad ideas are existent within the movement, they are more likely engaged in our world, which means that we're able to curb the excesses. They are more likely also not to resort to violence because it knows it hurts their chances. But then three, they are more likely to rely on things like policy change and other conventional means within status quo instead of feeling hopeless in their world where they know that nobody is listening to them, nobody understands them, and therefore they go crazy and deranged and decide to act in different ways in which they will come. How then are we able to access the impacts in our world? Because we say for the most vulnerable people, they do not have a voice in both worlds. What this discourse is able to do is to present this to them in ways in which it can be broken down. And what this guy says is that the discourse is likely to be very emotional or highly polarized or provocative. We think in our world, and Andrew shows you specifically, when you have these movements existing, they can exist in many forms, either like the AOC movement as it exists within the Democrats Party or the Green Party as he described it, which means that these individuals are able to influence the structure in different ways. How? Because I showed you, when they exist in those small ways, in those small corners, they are unable to have the structure to be able to challenge the system. It means that the elites are able to push it away, brush it aside, or tag them in very, very different ways in which people do not believe or buy in them. On our side, the growth of this discourse or the rise means there's more buying. It means that people are likely to think about it in a way that it provides stronger competition and threats to the establishment in order for them to amass or save those changes. And the reason this is important is because on their side, they need to show why when this exists in very, very small ways, the elites will be threatened by this in order for them to change and then have the impacts they have in their system. I'll take CG.
Yes, but I'm completely unclear why this uniquely needs to be an anti-establishment discourse. I can still say indigenous people have a problem. We have a problem with climate change. There can be discourse around all of these things and can still support the establishment way of solving it.
No, see, the debate is that all of your discourse or discussion continues to happen within the establishment, which places culpability, which people place culpability on those very same individuals as the ones causing the problems, i.e. they didn't care about us. They allowed corporations to continue to mine within our neighborhoods and poison our rivers. These are the same people who gave us vaccines or medicines which are causing these large-scale impacts or effects. I'm unsure why the discourse that happens in the world is able to change those specific individuals. And we showed you, especially within developing nations and within poorer areas, even when people do change parties, they're unlikely to have the level of change which you have in your world because these remain the same elites and individuals which they're changing over and over and over again. People are more likely to find solution within a sect which they feel is outside of status quo because they have completely failed to believe in the system as it exists. How then is this discourse likely to be good? Because we say on our side, it is far more engaged. You have far more academia, more discussions within it, and it is far more likely to disperse the right, but they want to co-opt everyone. They want to co-opt a lot of people. even in the worst case scenario where you buy nothing from us, notice that this discourse then means that we're able to trim the excesses and we're more likely to engage it, which means that we have the level of benefits which we have in our work. Secondly, we're also able to provide that robust competition where that buy-in and that structure then is able to threaten the establishment in order for them to cause the level of changes in sociality, etc., or even that is even when they are not voted into power or etc. But even in the worst case scenario, there exist structures which can then be able to serve as legitimate challenge to the establishment. On our side, you get solvency and you get less radicality. Vote opening opposition, and we go through.
I think with the yellow for a fine speech, I would like to welcome the member of government.
Just give us a second to arrange the papers.
Sorry about this delay. I'm just going to take a second to take a sip of water, and then I'll be turning my timer on and starting the debate. Okay. Okay. Am I clearly audible? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, I'll take a bit of closing in like 5 minutes, so be ready, guys. Okay, I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. From the opening cap, it's unclear for us if this brings a change in the establishment as a whole, but we know for certain that the rise of this will get more people to buy into this narrative, buy into this discourse, and cause harm doing so and following this discourse, which is something that we're going to pursue. But first, we have a bit of responses on the opening themes. Basically, there exists on both sides of the house an incentive to critique the government and its unfavorable policies, to critique, like to point out the flaws inside of the institutions. These incentives are coming from like 5 groups of people. Basically, like opposition parties still have the same incentive to critique the government. Secondly, social movement groups still have the incentive to critique some unfavorable policies and fight for their rights. Thirdly, news outlets still have an incentive to critique the government because they're backed by opposition parties, backed by some foreign agents, all of these things. Fourthly, people still have the need to protest when something goes wrong without this discourse being involved. Fifthly, ordinary people have an incentive to talk about the matters that are pressing them and kind of share the knowledge of this critique. Now, all these individuals still have that incentive. So it's unclear to us why this discourse is going to push them to cause a revolution. But we know for certain it's going to push them to do more radical bad things than on the competitive. Now, sometimes there exists some radical action, but more often than not, this action following this kind of discourse leads to apathy. Why is that? Firstly, radical action is exhausting when you need to be involved in it full time, basically. Going to protest is exhausting and all of these things. Secondly, followers of anti-establishment discourse lose trust in the ability of changing the society. Why? Because it's framed as something that is so kind of big, a big serpentine structure of like the establishment. Because they see no change due to them protesting. They see not having a critical mass in order to cause this change of happening. Thirdly, they're not being politically oriented, so it's kind of limits them in the ability to actually form this critical mass and cause some change doing so. Thirdly, radical action always have radical consequences. That means it's likely for the government to crack down on these protesters and kind of shut them down doing so, which kind of demotivates this public that wants to push for this change. Fourthly, you fundamentally lose confidence in the institutions. It's easier for you to just act in a way that's opposing the establishment rather than protest. How does that look? Well, not getting vaccinated, not voting in elections, not being politically active in supporting some critical groups that might provide you some beneficial change in the long term. Then it's more easier than going and protesting, because you see how the powerful system is. You see that the opposition also doesn't want to destroy the establishment, but just wants to kick people that are sitting in the establishment currently. They don't want fundamental change. They just want change in the structure of governing society. Now, onto our case, basically, how we kind of reframe this debate. Well, OG kind of fails to point out how this discourse actually changes your behavior in these terms. Now, discourse shapes the way in which you see these critical institutions that are inside of this establishment. How is it able to do so? Well, basically, you have TikTok and like holding Biden administration accountable for everything he's done. Secondly, you have like no vote, we need a revolution kind of narrative going on through social media for all of this. Outliers. Thirdly, you have like John Oliver and other kind of anti-establishment shows that are proposing this narrative and all these things. Also, you're being bombarded by these negative actions that the establishment is doing, and you never have any good news. That's the nature of this discourse. It's always strictly against the establishment, meaning it's overblowing mistakes made by the government out of proportion, meaning you see them as being incompetent, as being illegitimate. Secondly, you have a lot of conspiracy reporting in terms of this. Why? Because they need to make it more illegitimate. They have to make it more incompetent. They have to make it so it has perverse incentives to control you, because you need to frame the establishment in that way in order to get this buy-in. How does that work? Basically, allegations on military kind of corporations owning the society, the kind of governmental structure, and forcing them to do these external policy changes. Secondly, you have like big pharma controlling the FDA narrative, which means big pharma is the big bad guy that kind of makes our insulin cost $800, which means he doesn't have these good incentives for us, and they frame it as such. This serves to paint the establishment as being severely corrupted and severely illegitimate in providing for the government. Meaning, people lose the confidence because the people who are pushing this narrative don't have these perverse incentives. They're not part of that establishment. They're not part of the political structure and all of these things. Now, after you lost confidence in the establishment, but more specifically in the institutions that are there to care for you, you risk to get much more harm. Why? In terms of like having an economic crisis, having pandemic or health crisis, or having some drastic policy or civil changes that might net some good. Why is this going to likely cause some harm? Because these actions taken by the establishment or the government are more likely to galvanize you and to passionately force you to oppose them. Why? Because you don't trust them to have a good incentive to actually help you in change of the society, to give you some benefits. Why is that so? Because you firstly don't believe them outside of crisis. And when crisis happens, everything turns to shit, basically. Why? Because you see all of these prices going rampage, you see all the people getting the disease, all of these things. That makes you even less confident in these institutions. Also, you don't have the confidence that they're able to propose something good because of all of the things I mentioned. Impact is, regardless of the quality of the policy or the kind of action being implemented, you are likely to oppose it. That means not getting vaccinated, which is going to spill over to the healthcare system, spill over to the economical system, and pushes for more regulation in terms of limiting your freedoms. I will now take closing, if you have anything. Opening.
Our rise then means that more people are involved in this discourse and there's better policies and we are able to eliminate the level of radicality. If these institutions are failing people, why is them losing out on them a comparative benefits that we need to...
Okay, I will show you the comparative, basically. So this is a huge impact in terms of like you not getting vaccinated because you have been pushed to not trust the government and these institutions. Why? Because on intensity, it hurts the health system a lot. Why? Because you're taking a spot inside of that hospital because you risk getting a stronger type of disease than you would if you were vaccinated. Secondly, you're taking scarce medical resources that could save someone else's life that you wouldn't need to take if you got vaccinated. Thirdly, you're being an economical cost to the government because you don't trust them enough to take this that is being proposed by them. On the comparative, and you're also jeopardizing the health of other individuals. On the comparative, you'll be much more likely to get vaccinated because you don't lose trust in the establishment. People who already lose trust in the establishment in the first place for more conspiracy, they are outside of this debate because this narrative doesn't control them. It concerns like the ordinary people seeing the flaws of the government and also. Now, second impact, you're being more apolitical due to not having trust in these users, which leads you to not support the opposition because you don't trust them either because they're part of the kind of same apparatus, which leads to less checks and balances for the government. Secondly, it leads to you not turning out to vote and not having your kind of wishes represented in the government. I'm clearly in this.
I think the member of go for a fan speech. I would like to welcome the member of opposition.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Right. Let me put my camera. Okay. So starting in 3, 2, 1. So the best thing that can happen in this debate is us going through, obviously, and then CG also, because they're our friends. So keep that in mind while you're judging. You don't want to ruin a friendship, do you? So this debate on top half is just weird. Or like seriously, opening government gives us a definitely far-fetched case which says this is a radical action and murdering people, etc., which is not anti-establishment, it's borderline terrorism. I don't think that the majority of anti-establishment movement work like this, because in most anti-establishment movements, this would not like work, because you wouldn't be able to like get coalitions, to get money, to get funding, to get people on your side of the house. This is like literally terrorism, and it's definitely too far-fetched. Opening opposition, however, gives us a soft case on the other hand, right? This is like environmentalist movement, like having opposition parties and everything else. I think environmentalist movement as opposition parties will exist anyways, and they have even before the anti-establishment got here. Notice that all of their impacts are like, it's good to have a political discourse. It's good to have a debate. This is something that happens when you have a functioning politics in a country. This is not anti-establishment. So none of those two is actually anti-establishment. So before I go on, I want to give you one very important frame before going into our substantive, right? We think that taking the establishment down is very, very hard, borderline impossible in some countries. Note that people have lived in oppressive regimes for hundreds and thousands of years, and little has ever changed. Also note that anti-establishment is not a new thing, right? There is a rise of anti-establishment with the social media and everything else, but the anti-establishment existed through history. And notice that it rarely has actually made any significant change. Note, this is not like I lost a paper, but it doesn't matter. Notice why is this important? Because notice that opening government and opening opposition don't really give you reasons why you will actually have a change. We think that change is hardly going to happen anyways on both sides of the house, because establishment is usually too strong. And the reason for this is multiple. Number one, usually the parties control the police that control the people. They also usually control the media that control the narratives in countries. They also like have secret police that take down the opposition leaders. They also have huge tons of money that are through which they're able to control the people. They also have huge international support, but also inner support of their politicians and ministries and everything else. But also in majority of countries, you don't necessarily have the institutions, nor the civil society, nor the NGOs to actually make significant change. What this narrative does, and why this narrative, like this framing, is important, because then actual change in many countries in the world, which are not the Western countries, is very, very highly unlikely that it will ever happen. Notice that this like opening government talks a little bit about the change, but I'm not sure how much they convince us. All in all, this happens rarely. It might happen somewhere in the West and everything else, but literal and structural change is very hard to happen on any side of the house with the rise of the anti-establishment movement. It's not that big of a thing. So why is this then important? Two things. Number one, because it gives people hope. Notice that what does this argument mean? Note, in majority of like underdeveloped countries, people feel hopeless. Opening government talks about hopelessness, but never goes further than this, right? So what does this look like? Number one, people feeling like there is no future in that country for them, feeling like their kids are going to suffer just as much as they're suffering everything else. But also they feel like they're the only ones that are going through this, because given the media narratives that always tell you that it's good, that you have the money, that the economy is perfect and everything else, you don't necessarily feel like you're the only one in that fight. But even if you don't feel like you're the only one in that fight, you necessarily feel like there's not enough masses that will actually change something, and they're actually willing to fight for anything, meaning that people are literally hopeless and are just living day to day knowing that their lives are screwed and everything else. So what does this hope mean? Notice that like establishment through media and everything else tells you that you are the minority, that you're actually doing great, that nothing is wrong and everything else. But also you don't know a lot of people whom you agree with and everything else, because people are usually silenced. This is not something you can talk about. But even if you know a lot of people that you agree with, those people are not necessarily the ones that are actually going to make significant change, and you don't think that there is a significant change going to happen. So why is this important? Because through internet, through the social media and the rise of the anti-establishment movement, thousands of people, you now see that thousands and thousands of people, not necessarily only in your country, but all over the world, are willing to change to like there is a narrative that we need to take these bastards down, that there is a huge amount of corruption, and you necessarily see that a lot of people on your side, right? So you believe that change is actually going to happen and everything else. else. Notice this argument stands irregardless of change actually happening. It only means that there is hope for people who need the hope the most, right? So how does this work? This means it's easier for you to cope with everyday life. It's easier for you to like go through the day and raise your children and everything else because you know that there might be significant change. But also notice that this narrative tells you there is always hope. So if maybe we didn't get them down this time, but we'll do it next time. We'll do it tomorrow. We'll go again and rally and protest and everything else. So this narrative is perpetuating itself and always goes through your head and always tell you that there is actually hope. Even though hope might never come, and even though like change really might never come, this is something that is very important for people. This makes it easier for them to live their lives. I already gave you a framing and 7 lines of analysis why change is very unlikely to happen in most of these countries. On a comparative, people are much more hopeless. People like feel like there is no future, that everything is so good and their lives much worse. Second argument on minorities, because notice in most of these countries, we're talking about third world countries, underdeveloped regions and everything else. In most of these places, minorities are seen as the enemy. Why? Because number one, politicians need the enemy because they need the narrative they're protecting you and everything else. Secondly, minorities are usually the easiest target. They have no protection. They are foreigners for us, so people buy this narrative easily. But also thirdly, notice that you want yourself protected from someone who's not from around and everything else. This is a narrative that these politicians use in order to stay in power and everything else. So how does this change with the anti-establishment thing and everything else? Notice that this is a unifying narrative. Why? Because it needs to people in order to work. It works by the numbers, right? It's a narrative that tells you that we're all this part of the same problem. We're all swimming in the same amount of shit, and that only united we can actually change something and everything else. Notice this argument is also regardless of actual change happening, because as I already explained, change is very unlikely to happen in actuality, right? But why is this important? When you have masses of people that all feel like they're part of the same problem and they don't necessarily see each other as a threat, this is much better for these minorities that are on a comparative in a terrible position, because these parties use them as a tool to say that they are protecting you from them, that they are the ones that are like destroying your lives, like WUDC with the Croats and everything else. So why is this important? Because you don't see these people as a threat anymore. You don't see them as someone who's against you. You see yourselves as part of the same problem and like part of the same fight and everything else. This means much better lives for minorities in all of these countries, because changes anyways are very unlikely to happen. Because of all these reasons, CG and
I think the member for profile speech. I would like to welcome the government.
Okay, just give me a second, just to arrange the papers. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's first respond to the question opening opposition posed to Lucky. Like they're saying, oh, but if the government is so bad, it's probably going to be bad even in those like crises and those moments. Notice that this is usually firstly an important framing. Anti-establishment is on the rise in countries with better and worse establishments, meaning that there are some establishments in the world which like respond decently to crisis, or at least like follow science, follow important decisions that need to be made, and in those places like getting vaccinated, wearing masks, all of those things were largely recommended by establishment and then not complied with by the people who bought into this like anti-establishment narrative, which were like larger amount. Like there will be probably some people who don't buy in on both sides of the house, but on their side it's uniquely larger due to the fact that this narrative is rising and encompassing more people. Secondly, there is often, even in the worst governments, good like reasons, selfish reasons for the government to withstand the crisis well. Like first, because they know that every their moves will be watched by opposition and will be critiqued. Secondly, because they want the will of the people on their side, so they don't protest, so they don't do many bad things. Thirdly, because they don't want really high debt numbers, really many companies going under. Fourth, because that is bad for them to get re-election, bad for them to get future investments in their country, which is hard for them to remain economic growth, which is usually what keeps the governments in power. And finally, those people have investments in those local companies, they have investments in the local property values, therefore their income directly is kind of dependent on the fact how they handle a crisis, meaning they're likely in times of crisis to act good, and therefore once we not comply with them, we are actually likely to cause more harm for us and to all other peoples who are following the claim to the good ways of dealing with the crisis, but they cannot control us, and so on. Okay, so I just want to briefly touch CEO. I will be soft because they were soft towards us, but they also took some of my analysis, so I have to retaliate. They say gives hope. I think this impact is extremely minimal, meaning that you have hope for 5 minutes while on the internet, but when your life continues to be shit all other days of the week, I believe that then you're still pretty fucking sad because your economic conditions are terrible, and those are much more, they influence your life much more than the fact that you see on the internet some people are saying, yes, your government is bad, when you're actually the one who's living there, who's suffering all the consequences. Secondly, exactly this hope is what makes you more likely to do all of these little civil disobedience things, because you have to prove to yourself that you're doing your part. You have to prove to yourself that you're doing something. And when you're not going to do big acts, as like you already explained to you, because it is too much, you're going to not wear a mask, you're going to not vaccinate, you're going to during the crisis not listen to the government's advice, you're going to attack small government workers such as people of the police, or you're going to harass people who are working in the post office because you see them as part of the establishment that's oppressing you. And then those people are going to suffer all the ecological harms for more and more people due to the fact that they're being treated as shit just because they're poor and want to work a semi-normal jobs. And all those things you're more likely to do is precisely because of their analysis. And so, I'm not sure about that. And when they talk about minorities, notice this is something that also the opposition talks about. I'm not sure that minorities have a stranglehold on the anti-establishment narrative. Many times it's the right-wing parties, it's the parties that are actually against minorities who are talking about the gays are brainwashing your children. The establishment is crooked because they're giving immigrants too much power and all those things. Notice that yes, those things happen on both sides, because we admit we have political discourse in both worlds, but the difference is here, those people are propped up by the narrative of the establishment, which is much easier to buy into, and they give you more extreme narratives later once you already bought into the idea of anti-establishment. So why already the closing opposition explains why there is probably not going to be any change in any country. And I will also tell you that one thing, if something happens, it's for me, I'm completely unclear from both opening teams what is good. Anti-establishment people, as I have already explained, sometimes some of them have different incentives which are never explained why there are good people who are going to do good things. Secondly, it's to explain why these people are competent to actually then after that lead the state to do anything well. And thirdly, sometimes sometimes they are also propped up by some for example different companies or different big foreign influence, meaning that they still have shitty incentives that the opening parts want to play. This is never explained why this is not the case. So now let's kind of differentiate themselves from the, okay, so let's rebut a bit more of opening position first. One key thing is that their impacts are completely non-exclusive. As I've already asked them twice, you can still have a discourse about climate change being bad in our side of the world as well. And we think it is probably easy, especially for those big problems climate change. Everybody feels the climate change. Everybody's seeing the data on ice sheets melting. Many people are struck by heat waves. We all notice how now all these bad things we see hurricanes, fires, all this happening, meaning that those benefits are probably going to happen somewhat on both sides. Secondly, many of those parties don't run on an anti-establishment platform at all. They actually just want to get in parliament and saying through policy, we can actually change these things and improve, put on more regulations and such things. They don't propose a fucking anarcho-monkeyism, and therefore they say that therefore those parties lose legitimacy on their side of the house because people are more anti-establishment, don't trust them. So not really clear what the delta is. Yes, I will take Q opening.
If people are opting out and mass out of your system, there is greater incentive then to reform. But note, we gave you several reasons why the establishment has power to quell the movement in your world and how the rights creates
but still,
compete rather than to be struck
no,
down.
stop. Like, you never explained to me why so many people will buy into this narrative that they can now beat over that establishment. You never reach that critical tipping point in your analysis. That is why your case cannot be created highly. You explain, yes, some more people maybe now want to fight the establishment. You explain to me why we explain to you why most of the people won't do so, and therefore you never reach the critical tipping point that you're actually getting these reforms. Two more arguments to come from you. One is like on violence. I'm unclear why you're less likely to call for violence. For this question, now it sounds like you are more likely you want to call for violence. And even more importantly, when there's a lot of people in the anti-establishment movement, which is I have already explained, is very fraction. Some parts of that anti-establishment movement are going to call for violence. And if there's more people, even if some parts call for violence, it can be bad. And most vulnerable people get the voice. And like I've already explained, probably there is a lot of voices for most vulnerable people, which are less exclusionary, that are like more easy for people to bump to. And finally, what like separates us from our OG just talks about like benefits of the discourse, never clearly impacts it. What is a good discourse? What is a bad discourse? What differences does it give? We give you clear differences in actions actual people take, and Lucky explains in Wake how even some of those people taking different actions destabilitates the like government in the times of crisis and also makes people feel much worse. Therefore, I think we clearly win this round. Thank you very much.
I think the call for a fine speech. Would like to welcome the opposition whip.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Just a moment. So what is this debate actually about? So far, we've heard two different ways of describing being anti-establishment. We've had the government teams describe their version of the anti-establishment, and we have focused on the developing world. Here's the thing. OG defines anti-establishment as against social norms that are dominant and so on. If you're in a Western liberal democracy, the anti-establishment, they are correct. The anti-establishment will be probably like people that are anti-liberal, anti-minority, and so on. I don't like that, but we can concede to that. But here's why we should care more about the developing world. The thing is, what's anti-establishment in the developing world? Notice that in that case, most of these countries, underdeveloped countries that are autocratic, they are highly nationalistic and so on, where the dominant narrative is that you should fear and hate minorities. Neighboring countries, if you're a Serb and you want to protect your country, you should hate Indians, hate Croats, and so on. In these countries, being anti-establishment is actually being pro-solidarity, being pro-unity. It's saying they are scapegoating minorities is an anti-establishment statement in most of the world. And Babic and Lazar from CG, they know it because they're anti-establishment in Serbia, which they would admit if they weren't in this debate. Here's the thing. Why should we care more about the underdeveloped world? Well, firstly, it's far more people overall. So the scale is simply, we're talking about more people because more people live in these countries. But usually people in these countries live far worse, meaning that if we prove some benefit to their lives, a larger benefit, it will be a stronger impact. So stronger impact, more people. But also notice that in the countries they talk about, Western liberal countries, there are already strong institutions or strong protections for minorities, the things that people in the developing world, most of them don't have. That's why they are a crucial stakeholder in this debate and are more relevant. So let's see what we bring you. First, we say hope for people. Let's see how we prove it. They say, oh, your life will still be shit. Your 5 minutes on the internet. I'm going to give you multiple reasons why this hope will through first, when you're on the internet surrounded, you're going to be in an echo chamber, which we usually say is a bad thing, but we're all in echo chambers on the internet. So it's far better to be in an echo chamber surrounded by anti-establishment discourse, which tells you you shouldn't hate Albanians and so on, that they are your friends. You're all suffering under the same system, meaning that when you're gonna have a combination by the second, you're going to provide these opinions and so on. And in this case, I say it's good to be surrounded by, so let's say those people are your comrades and whatever. Thirdly, this is a perpetuating narrative. You're going to hear it all the time. It's going to last. You're going to, and so on. So it is something that is long term when you're thinking about it. Even though, fourthly, it's usually like a future promise. This narrative does not tell you things are good right now. That's what the government does. It tells you things can get better. We're all agreeing, we're fighting and so on. Even if we don't take them down on this phony election or on this protest, we're fighting, we're gonna fix things. And notes that people, even throughout history, they've suffered under like very, very bad situations and so on. But the one thing that keeps people alive is hope. This gives people hope for a change. If people feel that they will live awful lives and their children will live awful lives, that is desperate. But if they feel hope, then they're far better. So these are our impacts. And let me explain the impacts. First, you're going to feel, whatever your life is, you're going to feel better about it, thinking that maybe in 5 years, your life will be better. Secondly, you're going to feel a lot better about your family, your children, and so on, because it's very important for parents and so on to feel like their kids could have a brighter future and so on. Thirdly, you're going to be less depressed, because notice when you're depressed and you feel very down, the worst thing is thinking that this will last forever. There won't be any change and so on. And this impacts people, all people, like most people on the planet are actually impacted by this, and that's why it is relevant. We don't need to prove any sort of social change, which is hard for the reason Georgia tells you, the military, media influence, so on, cracking down. All of that is completely changed. We don't rely on any of that. Even if change never comes, notice that these people still cling on, like Lazar and Babic, they 10 years from now, they're still gonna be against nationalism and whatever. They're never gonna give up. The same as and me and Joel. So the same. Okay. So let's see. And the second thing we bring you is like the position of minorities. What are the impacts of this? When far more people in a society are having discourse how minorities are scapegoated, how minorities are suffering the same or even worse as us, what's the impact? Governmental policy probably won't change. That will be hard to prove. But what will change is the way you treat minorities. You're far less likely to discriminate against them. You're far more likely to give them support or whatever. You're far less likely to hate on them, which improves the lives of ethnic or religious group in these dictatorial countries. I'll take a POI from opening.
So we told you that there is an us versus them narrative against the political class, so there is no unity, especially when these discourses interact. Why is there no retaliation?
Look, it should be an us versus the political class, because you're living in a nationalistic, highly nationalistic country that is hurting minorities, that is discriminating, that is pushing nationalism. You should have an us versus them narrative in those situations. Okay, let's compare ourselves to the other teams. First, CG. They managed to prove that in Western liberal democracies, this sort of anti-establishment can have bad consequences, like less people taking vaccines and so on. We see that probably a lot of things influences whether you will take a vaccine or whatever in a crisis. But still, even if they prove, and even when they prove a sort of impact that more people will take vaccines, notice that our impact influences literally billions of people. It influences hundreds of millions of minorities, whether they will take they would take less discrimination and so on. And it gives billions of people a hope that their lives and the lives of their future will be better, which makes their lives noticeably better. How do we compare it to the opening opposition? The opening opposition takes on a very heavy burden where they try to prove like meaningful change and so on. In many countries are simply dictatorships where you cannot have change, where opposition parties cannot function and so on. So we believe that the way we crucially go over them is that our case is actually does not need to prove like municipal societal change, like change in the structure of your economy, accountability, and so on, especially because there are many things that go against you when you're there. But we prove like a lot better lives because people are now going to feel like they and them children do have hope, something to fight for, and so on. And secondly, we prove to you that the better position of minority. So we don't need to prove radicalism or things like that. Thank you, and it was a pleasure to debate this.
I thank the opposition group, and I thank all the speakers for a fun debate. So if you could, I should instead all of the speakers and observers just leave the breakout room we educate here, unless there's a different system.
Yeah, thank you.
No, okay. I assume it's that. So please, everyone leave, and yeah, I'll announce the results in due time.
Thanks, everyone.